Today in the EU, strategic dialogue calls for big changes in EU farm funding. The strategic dialogue on agriculture has finally come to an end yesterday. For 7 months, 29 actors in the agrifood sector have met to negotiate how to turn EU agriculture into a more equitable industry. Stakeholders' final recommendations are major and suggest agricultural policy needs to fundamentally change. What does this shift look like? Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Giada Santana, and this is Today in the EU. Today, we will explore what the future holds for the agri-food sector with Agri-Food Hub editor Angelo di Mambro. Hi, Angelo.
Hi, Giada. Thanks for having me.
The EU is confronted with the ambitious task to accelerate this transition towards a more sustainable and competitive agri-food industry. What role does the strategic dialogue on agriculture play in it?
The strategic dialogue is an initiative launched last year by President of the Commission Ursula von der Leyen to depolarize the debate on food and agricultural policy that is quite heated. The first meeting was held in January, and after roughly 8 months, the conclusion and the final report of this strategic dialogue has been published. It's 120 pages, it's very long, and then it targets the vision of the EU agri-food system, let's say in 2035, 2040. So it might seem something very far from the current affairs in EU policy, but it will feed into the vision on the future of agriculture and food that Ursula von der Leyen will present, let's say before March. She committed to present it in the first 100 days of her mandate.
We all know already today that we must do more and we will do more to protect our farmers and to make the agri-food system more resilient, more competitive, but most importantly, also more sustainable.
And next to Ursula von der Leyen, yesterday we saw Peter Strohschneider, professor and chair of the group. You had a chat with him. How was it?
Oh, I had the chance to talk to him after the press conference. We talked about the report, but not only, because it's no doubt that he had a very difficult task. And he also told me that.
Liters and liters of coffee, really. I mean, what I can say is that there were days where I thought, Guy, I'm too old for this. I could go on holidays with my wife. I'm a pensioner.
It was very difficult to reach a consensus. And also we discussed about why food is so controversial.
Yes, and his job was particularly difficult because when we look at the list of stakeholders, we have 29 actors that come from very different parts of the agri-food sector, from Greenpeace to biodiversity, NGOs, to fertilizer lobbies and trade unions. Strohschneider defined the achievement a conceptual consensus. But how likely are the actors to get to a concrete consensus in the next steps of the CAP?
But it's not only about reforming the CAP or the CAP, it's about reforming the food system, so it must be broad in a sense. And then it's a vision. The report does not go into detail, and maybe this is the only way to have a consensus, not going into the detail.
Right.
Still, we have 29 stakeholders that have on some topics very divergent views that sign something together.
Still a success, then.
Yes.
Going into the recommendations that the report suggests, one of them really highlights the importance of providing a fair, higher income for farmers. How will this social economic support take place? What concrete form will it take?
So this is an idea that has been floating for years now. The subsidies for farmers, the largest chunk, it's an income direct support. It's based on the area. There is a reason why. When it was decided, it was, and maybe it still is, the most objective criteria to distribute the payments. This has been criticized throughout the years because the result is that the greatest part of resources goes to large farms. In the report, there is a clear recommendation to move away from this system.
Income support is a central function of the CAP, has already been and will continue to be. The criteria will be need economic viability and need of this.
But there is also the acknowledgement that the challenge ahead to find another system is quite difficult. We will need to study a new one. That's why the report mentions 2 cycles of the CAP, that is roughly 15 years to accomplish that. Yes, it will not be tomorrow, but this acknowledgement that it cannot be done tomorrow, this is important.
Moving onwards to other recommendations, another really important point is that there seems to be a shift away from quantitative targets. There's rather more talk of benchmarks and specifically incentives for farmers to fulfill environmental obligations. Tell us more about it.
So this part of the report is more nuanced compared to the one of moving away from hectare-based, area-based payments. But there is a lot of insistence on the fact that the farmers must be rewarded for the environmental services they give.
The more sustainable production patterns and practices are in the core economic interest of the farmers. The least do you need them to oblige them to fulfill something, because they will do even more, because they get money for it.
Now the system works essentially with, okay, if you're a farmer, you want to get access to the subsidies, you have to comply with some agricultural practices. If you don't comply, you don't get the subsidies. In the report, this kind of structure called conditionality is mentioned maybe once. But there is a lot of insistence instead of incentives. The more you incentivize, the less you need to oblige. Also, Ursula von der Leyen said yesterday that the system needs to change, to shift from micromanagement, so to say, to the farmers, the 10x farmers,
to comply with specific requirements, let's
to comply
say.
with very specific requirements. Let's not forget that this has been the first move to simplify, let's say, the CAP in the past months. The CAP that entered into force in 2023 to respond to some farmers, but I always underline it was not just a request from farmers, it was a request from national authorities to simplify some green requirements. From what von der Leyen said, I think that we will not backtrack on that. So looking at incentives rather than obligations. Now, with which money, this is another story.
That's exactly a point I wanted to get to, budget. CAP is quite a beefy policy file. We're talking about more than 300 billion. Just yesterday, the economics think tank Bruegel suggested to reshape the budget. The budget is taking quite a big share of EU funds. Can we expect any changes towards that? And how does this report fit in this conversation surrounding the CAP budget?
The report is not about that. As Strohschneider said, the report is not about the volumes and the numbers, and it's about the functions to be accomplished by certain policies. The amount of money to be devoted to those challenges, it will be one of the essential parts of the debate that will start, I think, officially, let's say, it's already going on, but it will start with the proposal of the Commission on the multi-annual financial framework, so the budget for 2028-2034.
Yes, of course, as Strohschneider said, the report is a pre-political document more than a concrete one. Well, what are the practical next steps, right? We have the report, we have it freshly printed here in the studio. The next mandate is about to start. So what should we be looking for?
By March 2025, von der Leyen will present her vision on the future of the agriculture and food systems in Europe. And the report published yesterday will feed into it. Then the multi-annual financial framework proposal, and after that, the common agricultural policy reform proposal. So it's a report with an horizon up to 2040, but it will be important to see how it will influence, will affect also the debate. It is about to start in a few months from now.
Thank you, Angelo.
Thank you, Giada.
I'm Giada Santana, and this was Euractivist Today in the EU podcast. Visit Euractivist to stay on top of the latest news, sign up for our podcast newsletter, and if you haven't subscribed yet, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever it is that you get your podcasts. Leave us a star review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite streaming platform. It will really help us spread the word about our work. This episode was produced by Evi Chiorri and I. See you tomorrow. As part of our commitment to accuracy, inclusion, and transparency, Euractiv is part of the Trust Project.